All right, let's get to him now live in the studio. Champion Data's Daniel Hoyne. Hoyney, welcome back.
G'day, guys. Pleasure to be here.
Mate, what about the contract negotiations?
Dragged on.
Dragged on to the last minute.
Have a listen to you two, would you?
Unbelievable.
We're always going to be here. We
Okay.
enjoyed it so much last year, just coming in every Tuesday night. It was always going ahead.
When you brought in a high-profile player manager to do your deal, I thought to myself, hello.
On your advice, I must admit.
Is this Jamara Ugle-Hagen or is this Daniel Hoyne? I couldn't work it out for a while.
I tell you what, there's a lot of people around town who live for this hour, Hoyney, so you better produce. Rowan, the angry Rowan from Armidale, he's desperate to find out about the Demons. Where do you want to start?
The D's, yeah, that was a hard watch, wasn't it? It was a hard watch, unfortunately, for Melbourne, and we'll get into that game in a little bit more detail shortly. But as we did last year, just sort of sitting back and having a bit of time to dissect the round of footy, and probably the number one overall observation from the weekend, but. I think if you're a footy lover and you want to see transition and you want to see the ball in flow,
share and free,
I think you're going to be happy, and you should be happy to sit back and watch 2024
Do you think
footy.
we say that at this time every year though, Hoyney? Like when the weather's good, teams are fresh, they've worked on their ball movement all summer and all off season. Often there's big forwards kicking bags of goals early, and we get sucked in. We say, "Oh, this." Jeremy Cameron's going to kick 100. Should Charlie Curnow kick 100? And it never happens. When winter sets in, when teams study the opposition, when they get defensively strong, we get back to what we probably know more of.
When coaches have lost three in a row.
Exactly. Do you think that?
No.
Do you think we always get sucked in at this time of year?
I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of what you're talking about. I think we can overreact, if you like, to what we're seeing round 3, round 4, round 5. What I'm referring to is not necessarily, looking back and going, ball movement's going to be the highest that we've seen or the best that we've seen in 10 years, 15 years off the back of round 1 or off the back of pre-season footy. What I'm referring to is, and I'm a believer in history until history changes. Mm-hmm. And forever and a day, we have talked about you've got to defend and you've got to win contests, and that's true to a degree. The contest side of things can be a bit of a myth. The defence side of things is not. So the last 10 years, each premier has ranked top 6 defensively, right? Each premier has ranked top 6 at defending the turnover game. I get that.
Can I just, for our audience who have just joined us, just explain defensively? Are you talking about on the score?
So purely just for this, just purely your points against.
Okay, right.
Just purely your points against. So that is always going to be there. But one thing that is coming into play year after year now is the ability to be able to move the ball. And if you can't move it, you are in big trouble. So keep in mind, the last 10 premiers have been top 6 in what everyone talks about, defence, right? So too has the premier in their ability to be able to move the ball from one end of the ground to the other.
As defined by
going
back
from
D50
D50
to
to
forward
50.
50. Yep.
Each premier for the last 10 years has been top 6 in that aspect of the game. So if you can't move it, and you are playing boring footy, and that is not your objective, or one of your top 2 or 3 objectives is to be able to move it, history says you are in trouble. Because the reality is that against good opposition as the year goes on, and all we're doing now for the next 24 weeks is trying to qualify to get us high up the ladder to actually have a crack at it when it matters most. And when it matters most, you're not going to have the game on your terms for 120 minutes. That's a reality of it. You're playing against the best.
Yep.
You're not going to have it on your terms. So when it's not on your terms, can you get out? Can you get out, and can you actually get out through free-flowing ball movement? So you have a look at the top 6 teams last year. St Kilda were the best ball movement team in the competition. Ross gets it. Everyone talks to me that Ross is defence, but he understands. I think he understands as well that you've got to have speed behind the ball, and he's invested heavily in that area. Port have invested heavily in that area. Essendon's ability to be able to move the ball last year was top 3. Defensively, they were poor. If they can get that defensive balance right, who knows? Brisbane and Collingwood also top 6 last year, and then the Hawks, but they didn't have the defensive profile to back it up. So the teams on watch this year, and we've already seen a couple of these, Melbourne are clearly on watch. They were the 5th worst ball movement team last year, and I'll get into their ball movement in a little bit of detail shortly. Carlton are on watch. They were in the bottom half of the ladder last year in terms of their ability to be able to move it. And then the Dogs. The Dogs were bottom 4 in their ability to be able to move it. So if you can't move it from one end of the ground to the other and be able to get out through creativity, through whatever sort of ball method that you actually got, you are in big, big trouble.
Where were Freo in that list?
Freo were down bottom 3 last year.
What if you can move it, but the final piece of it breaks down? So what if you can move it from back 50 deep to forward 50? You've got the entry, but the entry's poor or predictable or slow, and you can't score. So where does the actual scoring, finishing part go into this?
Well, the expectation is that if you're generating an inside 50 off the back of going from coast to coast, you're going inside 50 to less numbers.
Yeah.
And you should be going inside 50 to a quality entry, which you should be scoring probably 1 in every 2 of those entries. As opposed to those repeat entries like the Melbourne types, where they're able to win the ball back in their forward half, but they're going into 30 numbers, 25 numbers. How hard is it?
As against Sydney on the weekend, who went in with an open
Well, as
forward
against Brisbane quite often, who go into an open forward 50 with talent. You're going to be able to score more often than not off the back of that. Collingwood, GWS on the weekend, they're going inside 50 to less congestion. You're going to be able to score off the back of it. You don't want to rely on it, but you need to have it in your weaponry when needed and tested late in the season.
So, Kane, question to you and to Hoyney. All of a sudden, Kitty Coleman's not there. Big miss. Brayshaw's not there. I think his best place was always across the half-back line, and Salem's not there because he's going to be running through the middle of the ground a fair bit. I know McVeigh's come into the side and McVeigh's come in for Melbourne, but these distributors across the half-back line are so underrated, or do you think it's others in the chain that are more important? Maybe the guy who kicks it in the last is more important.
Yeah, I think the whole of it's important, because if you want an entry to go in fast to less numbers, you're going off a turnover. So the whole structure, and we had Brent Daniels on the Sunday Footy Show, and we said, well, what's your role? Like, how are you defined? And he said, well, my main job is to protect the corridor. I'm like, people out there would go, what? You're a small forward. Your job's to kick goals. His first answer was, no, my job is to come up high and protect the corridor. Then from there he plays. So then from there you hope you turn it over, and then he reads it quickly and he goes, and you can see him getting out the back with Bedford. So I think the whole of the structure is important. In terms of personnel, Kitty Coleman's a huge blow, and I think you want to bring up Zorko in a minute, Hoyney, and I assume that relates to the role that he can play with Kitty Coleman. Now, I had a thought about McCluggage. Now, you want McCluggage everywhere. You'd love him on the wing. You'd want him on ball. I would think he would be very effective across half-back as well. So that was a left field one that I just thought of last night. Maybe they have a look at that with him going to half-back to provide some run and carry and drive. But, Hoyney, have you got a thought on those early injuries? Doherty's another one who hurts the ball movement of the Blues, and also their depth. You've mentioned Brayshaw. We've got Coleman. A couple of nasty ones.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get into the Coleman injury as we go on, but, I mean, clearly that's the biggest injury at the moment. The one saving grace for Brisbane, and clearly you don't want that to happen, but it is round 0. It is round 1. Like we've seen a history of key injuries, to your overall structure, where it does take time to actually adjust to that. So I think if you're a Brisbane supporter, you need to brace yourself for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, whilst they actually work out what works and what doesn't work, and whether that's having a look at McCluggage, as you said, Kane, or whoever it might be behind the footy. But if you think back to when Rance went down for Richmond early on in the season, it took them 6 or 7 weeks to recover and then go again. When Natanui went down for West Coast in 2018, it took them 4 or 5 weeks to regather just before finals, and then they were okay to launch into their final series. When Geelong lost Tom Stewart at the end of 2021, that was too late. That was the second last game, or the last game just before a final series. It's too late to recover from then. You're gone. So, the fact that they've lost him so early now gives them time to adjust, but just brace yourself and hang on almost for the next 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks whilst you do adjust.
Whilst you're running hot, Hoyney, on ball movement, a question has come from Matt at Maribyrnong, and he wants to know the team which was the most effective at scoring from a contest. It was Carlton's big go, wasn't it?
So Carlton were really strong in that phase of the game last year. Brisbane were extremely strong in regards to that. So they're probably the two last year that were able to actually score heavily off the back of that phase.
And just repeating, while it's more important to win from a turnover than a contest.
Yeah. So you more often than not, 60% of your score is coming off the back of winning the ball off the opposition, if you like. So, that phase of the game you have to have in order. If you don't have that in order, you're in big trouble. But you also want to, try and do whatever you possibly can in the contest side of the game as well.
Just whilst we're on ball movement, before we move on to your 7 main talking points, Hoyney, what about Richmond want to play that way. You can see that they're trying to go through the middle and be attacking. At North, we're going to have a look at them doing it. We saw it in the preseason. But what if you're asking your players to play to a game style that they can't or don't have the skill level to pull off? Because I'm not sure I've seen a team kick the ball more poorly than what I saw Richmond kick it in opening round.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's a fair call.
Do the numbers back that up? That was just off the eye. We direct clanger kicks that resulted in goals. Were your numbers telling you that as well?
Yeah, no, their kick rating as a whole was poor, especially that first half. It was well down on league expectation. But I think that there's ball movement, but there's different methods in which you can actually execute your ball movement. It doesn't need to be, absolute free-flowing, fast, electric footy. If you haven't got the players to be able to implement that, you're going to open yourself right up. So there's different methods in terms of which, if you want to go long down the line and play that contest game, if you want to be a switching team and go from one side of the ground to the other, that necessarily doesn't need to be, players with, elite speed or elite ball use. You just need to identify what you've got. Clearly, GWS have runners in their team and powerful runners in their team where they're able to overlap, run through corridor, take on corridor, a bit like what Conley were able to do as well. Brisbane, I don't think necessarily have that, but Brisbane were one of the best ball movement teams in the competition, but they did it a different way. They used angles on their kicks. They kept the ball going forward. They marked it more than what Collingwood and GWS did. So there's different ways to be able to execute it. There's no right or wrong. It's just working out what is best for your list to be able to execute it as best you can.
If you're going to give a gold medal for ball movement out of defence, I know Kane and his selectors ignored him last year, but surely the Lizard is the man.
He's number one.
When he's on the loose, one's better.
Yeah, so off our 100x ratings, which we'll continue to refer to on this show at will, which just takes into account your performance based on the role that you've played. So
your performance up against the average of that role?
Correct. Yep. So if you're either performing above or below expectation for that role. So Nick Blakey came out as a 5th best player in the competition last year. And then you're seeing with ball in hand, I can only imagine as a defender, he would be a nightmare to actually defend against when he's running through, because you got no idea what he's actually going to do, which just makes him so exciting.
But he also defends well. So to me, he's a complete package. Defends on a small or a tall, and then gives you that offense as well. So he's a freak. All right, let's move on to your 7 main talking points. Champion Data's Daniel Hoyne in the studio for the first time with us in 2024. So whilst we're on the Lizard, let's talk about Sydney's ball movement.
So we're going to continue the ball movement theme here for the first two topics. So we'll start with Sydney. So if you're sitting back watching that quarter, the first quarter on the weekend between Sydney and Melbourne, and you're seeing that little bottom left-hand screen pop up that Melbourne are winning contested possessions by plus 15 or plus 16, whatever it was, and then you look at the scoreboard and you're trying to work out, well, how are Sydney actually winning this game by, what was it, 9 points, 10 points, whatever it was, at quarter time? Well, yes, the contest side of things is important. That's what Melbourne preach themselves on, and we'll get to that next. But the ball movement and the execution with ball in hand is, as I said, is becoming more and more and more important. So the Swans, when they were able to win it in that first quarter, and this is why they're so dangerous. This is why I'm not putting them in that category yet. But to me, they're very similar and not far off that category of Collingwood, GWS and Brisbane, where they don't need to bash you. They just need to get their equal opportunity or even a little bit under, because their ball movement method and their execution with ball in hand is superb. So in wet, slippery conditions, that first quarter, they're going at almost 75% by foot. Melbourne are going at almost 55% by foot. The Swans' ability to be able to get out, as we said in that first quarter, was superb. Their ability to be able to win it back off that half-back area and then be able to go with the likes of Florent and then be able to go with the likes of Blakey was a point of difference and something that Melbourne didn't actually have, and that's where the majority of their score came from. Melbourne were hemming him in time and time again with 450 stoppage, and I think they had close to 15, 16, 450 stoppages for a quarter, which is a ridiculous number. But then when given their opportunity, the Swans, they were able to get out. They were able to get scoreboard return and actually get into quarter time, with a lead of 9 points, despite being belted around the contest. So their ability to be able to actually execute it when the time actually came and when they actually had their chance to actually win possession, that's what I'm talking about with the ball movement game, Kane. Sort of not necessarily referring to, okay, let's just sit back and see the best ball movement, competition that we've seen for 15, 20 years. It's more looking at individual teams and can you actually be able to hold up when things are actually against you. And I reckon, I'm not too sure what the two of you thought, but I thought that first quarter Melbourne probably had the majority of their share in that first quarter to be able to get a better return, but to be able to hold up, and then as we said, playing against good opposition, you're not going to have the momentum with you the whole time. Sydney get it in the second half, and they're able to actually run away with it.
It's a challenge for the umpires to pay free kicks inside the 20-metre arc, if you like. I think that there's so much congestion. You can pluck out a lot of free kicks. And I thought Melbourne were a bit stiff. I thought Sydney missed one, but I thought Melbourne missed a couple in the front 20 metres, given the congestion. But nevertheless, I digress.
Yep. So then moving on to Melbourne. So Melbourne next, and as I said, they were the fifth worst ball movement team in the competition, and it hasn't started well against the Swans on the weekends. They had 52 opportunities. Sort of from their D50, if you like, on the weekend, they went inside 58 times, which is a ratio of 15%, well below AFL average.
So they had 52 chances and went in 8 times.
8 times, well below AFL average. Even worse, from a scoreboard return, they had 79 opportunities from their defensive half. So 79 times they started with possession behind centre. They scored 1 goal from that return. So no one last year played straight line footy more than what Melbourne did. No one went long to a contest more than what Melbourne did last year, and no one tried to switch the ball out to the other side less than what Melbourne did last year. As I said, there's no right or wrong way to play, but I think when things aren't working, that's when potentially the adjustment needs to be made. So are we going to see them actually take on Corridor a little bit more this year to be able to open it up? Because they didn't take on Corridor too much last season, but when they did, in terms of their inside 50 returns, they were the second best team in the competition when they did go Corridor.
So why move Salem into the midfield?
They just didn't go enough. So I think I get the Salem move because they need a distributor in that midfield group as well. I think they just need him to win a bit more uncontested footy than contested footy like he did on the weekend. But for me, the magnet behind centre for Melbourne, which is going to be crucial for their ball movement game, is Rivers. So you look at if you look at Dan Houston, Jack Sinclair, Nick Blakey, Lockie Whitfield, Dacos behind the footy, Jack Chris behind the footy, Coleman now that he's gone. The best teams in the competition have that weapon where get the footy in their hands as much as they possibly can. This guy for a 6-week period last year excelled in that role. He was a top 10 player in the competition for a 6-week period. Melbourne lost 1 game in that 6-week period when he was flying. If I'm Melbourne, I'm wanting to get the footy in his hands 20 plus times a week because he creates and his ball use is superb behind centre. Get it in his hands more than what they are at the moment.
Do they need to play Petrarca more forward? I know they went there in the second half on the weekend, but they went there also towards the back end of last year because there were some injuries with really good success. Like, he's got to spend more time forward, doesn't he, Hoyney? Particularly with the injuries they've got.
No player had greater impact as a forward last year than what Petrarca did, and by a long, long, long way.
Yeah.
Long way.
So he hardly went there in the first half, or he went there for a bit with not much success. But that's got to be his role. So he really shouldn't be going past the centre line of the ground, I don't reckon.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting for us just to track it over the next couple of weeks once Clayton Oliver gets a bit more game time under his belt, whether or not that changes things. I mean, for a very rare occasion, we saw Clayton Oliver start start a game inside forward 50, which we never really see him do. So once, potentially he gets a bit more match fitness under his belt, potentially those roles change, but one to keep an eye on.
Tell me about the 5-time best and fairest from Brisbane, Dane Zorko.
So Kitty Coleman, what do you do with him? What do you do with that replacement? For me, I'm looking at the Zorko magnet and I'm looking at Zorko going to halfback because the role, Coleman's number one asset for me that he provides to Brisbane is his ball use and his creativity with ball in hand.
Are you saying this even though last year they trialled him at halfback and he was a modest success?
Yeah, I'm going with it. Again, as I said, it's round one. So you've got time to experiment, and now clearly you have to look at it. I'm going with it because last year Zorko was the number one rated kick in the competition, and by a long way. His field kicking was miles ahead of any other player in the competition last year. No Brisbane player on their list currently had more impact with ball in hand than what Dane Zorko did last year. And you look at the last 3 or 4 years when he has played down back. The performances, I know you say that it was modest, but the performances more often than not were actually above expectation in that role. So
he just looked too small to me to play the role.
He might be, it might not work. But that's where I'm starting with that because that was Coleman's point of difference.
Yep.
You need to find someone with that creativity, and you go through their list and you try and work out who that is, and you threw up. McCluggage came, and that could be someone to actually have a look at. But you need to have a look at those players on your list that are creative. And I can only really think of Zorko, Bailey, McCluggage, and I'm not too sure if there's anyone else. I know that they get Connor McKenna back in a couple of weeks' time or whatever it is. But to me, that's where I'm starting with, and I'm starting with Zorko in that position.
They trialled one we argued over Kane for a period of time last year. Who was that?
Rayner. Didn't work.
Right, yeah.
Nah,
the Rayner man.
Hoyney, the world-famous segment, Guess Who is back. So can you give us the clues before we head into this little breather and our audience can take a ping whilst we're in a break?
Very, very quick clue, very simple clue. Who was the second best player from round 0 on the weekend based off our 100x ratings?
The second best.
The second best. Well, the best is pretty obvious.
Question.
The best is pretty obvious. This bloke, we talked about him on this show a lot last year.
We're playing Guess Who, who's the second highest rated player according to champion data over the weekend. I'm assuming, firstly, Hoyney, that Matt Rowell was number 1.
No, Matt Rowell was not number 1.
Oh.
Not number 1.
Hoyney?
No. Heaney was number 1. Heaney was clearly number 1. That was the best game of his career, actually, on the weekend. Matt Rowell was high. He was high. He was inside the top 20.
Right.
But no, there's more to the game than just winning clearance.
Coming through. Jack Viney, Brody Grundy getting...
Jack Viney is a great guess. Number 3, Viney, for the weekend.
Well played, Paul.
Great guess.
This one... maybe onto something. Was it Callum Brown? Asked Connor.
Great guess as well. Callum Brown came in number 7 for the weekend.
Okay.
Great guess.
Lockie
Jeez,
Whitfield.
the audience is
What
on
about Will
fire.
Power?
Will Power was inside the top 30 or 40.
Okay, that's a
from the
shocking guess.
weekend.
The Lizard.
No, the Lizard is high. He's always high in our stuff. He was, top 12 for the weekend, Nick Blakey.
Jesse Hogan was another guess I was going to have.
Yeah, Hogan was good, but I can't see him on my first page,
Brent
so I'm not going to
Daniels-
scroll any lower.
Brent Daniels is a love child of champion data. Was it Brent Daniels?
Brent Daniels needs votes for his interview with you, Kane, on Sunday as
good.
well. He was
Spicy.
sensational.
Yeah,
He was
spicy.
magnificent, but
That
he's not in
D-rate.
there. He's not in there, unfortunately, Brent. He will be in there at some stage. We do love him, as you said, Kane. Could have been All-Australian last year.
He could have been. That's 2 that Kane got wrong.
I'm a bit lost. Tell us.
No, so Kieran Briggs came in
Briggs
as the
fella.
second best player for the weekend. So
Underrated all
he's-
last year.
Yeah, well, we talked about him a little bit on this show as the year went on. He only came into the team at about round 10 or 11.
Yep.
But from that point on, he was inside the top 30 rated players across the competition.
Unfairly slighted to the ruckman, your ratings, I've got to say. Like, if you're giving me Matt Rowell's 20 clearances off the charts, career best performance over Briggsy on the weekend, just the eye test. I'm just being honest with you, Hoyney.
No, I love your honesty, Kane. Never change.
Ratings are very much skewed in favour of the ruckman. They often rate very highly.
No, you're 100% right off the raw ratings, absolutely, but this takes into account the expectations. So it takes
What did
into
he do
account
well?
that ruckmen are actually meant to actually... so the thing that he does well is that he He's very rare for a ruckman that he actually executes in all phases of the game. Like that vision of him, late in the game chasing down, Jack Crisp. His ability to be able to win contests and clearance is strong. His ability to be able to get involved in the scoreboard, 5 score involvements for a ruckman. If he continues at that'll be number 1 for the season. His ruck work was up there with the best in the competition as well. So I'm just putting it on watch. I know it's only 1 game in. I think this guy, Kane, is going to be someone that you guys will be talking about at the All-Australian panel at the end of the year as being absolutely right up there in terms of being able to actually potentially win his first All-Australian jacket.
Kane, question for you without notice. If you get 3 ratings points for a hit out to advantage, should you get -3 for a hit out to disadvantage?
Well,
the answer is yes.
That would be hard. Well, if you hit it straight directly to the opposition, down their throat, probably. I mean, that'd be hard to judge. But for whatever reason, the ruckmen are rated highly. But the All-Australian ruckman position was interesting last year because I don't think anyone really grabbed it by the scruff of the neck. And
agreed.
Hopefully that happens this year, and someone is clearly the All-Australian ruckman, and maybe that man.
Just on your Matt Rowell conversation there too, Kane. So clearly no player had greater impact across the weekend in terms of their ball winning ability. Rowell's ratings, just in purely from his ball winning sense, we're probably not going to see anyone rate that highly in that aspect of the game. His ball use was in the negative.
Okay.
And I think this is the important thing that people need to get their heads around. And I think Charlie Cameron was a classic case. I looked at your rankings, your ratings, and Charlie was about a 2 or a 3.
He was one of the bottom-rated players on the ground.
Yeah, and the reason for that is because he missed 2 shots from 15 metres out. And I understand the way that ratings are assessed. You get, to every possession is a value out of 6 for whatever reason. And if you've got, for instance, that kick, 90% of equity is built up already, and if you chop it up, you're going to get -5 or 6.
Well, people talk about accuracy has been so important. Well, that's what we do. We penalise accuracy and we reward strong accuracy as well. So, those 2 misses from Charlie Cameron has pretty much cost Brisbane a game.
Hoyney, I think we're only up to number 4 of your 7 main talking points, so we're just a little bit behind, and that's on me. Tell me about Carlton's third quarter.
Yeah, so Carlton's third. Have I got Carlton's third quarter here?
Well, it's on my screen.
All right, I'll move. I haven't got Carlton.
Let's move on.
I'm going to jump on.
Sam Collins.
Apologies there, Kane. I might have actually missed that on mine. No, I just want to put this guy on watch because I reckon he might flourish under the Damien Hardwick system, and the ability to be so aggressive, in their defence, in that come forward defence. So he was the number 1 rated key defender from the weekend just gone. And his defensive actions, not only just to be able to win the ball back off the opposition, which he did 7 times on the weekend, but then his ability to be able to spoil it and diffuse it 13 times as well. So he's disrupted Richmond alone 20 times in a game. I think he might be someone this year that just elevates himself potentially into that top 4, top 5 key defender bracket, which might sort of put him on the cusp of an All-Australian squad sort of conversation. So I just want to put him on watch. I thought he was absolutely brilliant.
Sam
on
Collins
the weekend.
has gone on Hoyney's watch. What about the Tigers?
So the Tigers, just a couple of things for Richmond, and we've only got a couple of games where the data is, so we're not jumping up, sort of up and down, but we can only go off what we've actually seen. And I'm including the Collingwood-Pracky game, and I'm including obviously round 0 against Gold Coast. To me, at the moment, clearly their number 1 concern, which is really alarming for anyone, is your inability to defend ball movement. We've just spoken about how important it is to be able to move it, but if you can't defend it, you are in big trouble. So just consider this. So the AFL average in terms of your ability and how many points that you score when you win the ball back in your D50, you get about 10 points per game, from that. Collingwood in the practice match scored 11 times. They kicked 5 goals, 6. They were inaccurate. They kicked 36 points, which is a ridiculous number. They could have kicked 45, 50 points, which is just
so they got
off the
opened up
charts.
on the
Practice
rebound.
match, I understand you're actually trying to experiment things or whatever. Gold Coast, first half, 20 points alone, double the AFL average in a half of footy to be able to go from one end of the ground and to the other to actually score off the back of that. So that's a couple of games in a row where that is just red flag stuff if you're a Richmond supporter right now watching it. The other thing for me, and I'm not sure what you thought, Kane and G, on this, I was really surprised to see Jack Ross starting as sub. I thought Jack Ross's finish to the season, and his season as a whole last year was actually really good. We had him rated as one of the better wingmen in the competition, top 5 wingmen with the likes of Errol Goulden, Josh Dacos.
It's a good rating.
Nick Martin. He was actually in really good company. Then he starts a sub, which was a real surprise. But then when he came onto the ground, off the 100X ratings, no one had greater impact than what Jack Ross did.
It's a good point you make. So it's the last line on Footy Classified. I said, with where Richmond are at, why is Pickett playing? Why is McIntosh playing? Why is Grimes playing? Well, I look at Ross and go, okay, how old's Ross? He's 23. Anyone who's under 25 that has a future should be playing at that footy club. They need to get as many games into these types of players as possible, because Broad and Grimes and Pickett and McIntosh and Kazitsky is not going to be the future of Richmond's next finals push, whereas Ross maybe, and I know fitness comes into it, but players like Sonzi you want to see, and Mansell's available this week. That's what I think Richmond fans want to see, and with that takes a little bit of pressure off the expectation that this is a finals team. I don't think clearly it is not, but at least you're building more for the future. So I think that's a pretty good point you've hit on, and it's early days, it's round 1, but I think the writing's been on the wall for a couple of years now. We'll see if they're a bit more youthful at selection the longer the year goes on.
Yep, couldn't agree more.
Question on the Tigers: did the numbers tell you anything? And the first half was the white flag went up early. They just didn't. There was no effort, so it's probably too early to tell. But are you of the view that they're trying to play a Melbourne style of football rather than a Richmond style of football?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see, if that actually transpires, just given the fact that Uze's come from the Melbourne system. So whether or not they're going to implement a long down the line approach like we just spoke about with Melbourne before. There are signs of that a little bit at the moment. We probably need a little bit more evidence, before absolutely making concrete, sort of decisions on that. But there is a little bit of evidence at the moment that they might be playing a different way to what we've seen, the Richmond model over the last 5, 6, 7 years.
A word on the Pies?
Don't panic. Play that game 10 times. Collingwood supporters, I reckon you're winning that game 7 times. So
why is that?
So accuracy. So 60 entries. You created 33 forward-half turnovers, a ridiculous number. You've scored 27 times from 60 entries. Your forward 50 actually worked okay. Your inaccuracy in front of goal was horrific. So you had a lot of fortune over the last couple of years in terms of your opposition have been really inaccurate, and Collingwood been slightly above expectation. Only one game in, and it was a complete reverse. So GWS have kicked 18-6 from their 53 entries, which is the same sort of return for Collingwood with their 27 scores from 60 entries. Accuracy sort of separated that game. With that figure, yes, there were concerns with how you actually defended transition, and I think you can tidy that up. But your game looked in really good order against really good opposition on their home deck. Don't panic. And can I, just before I leave it, bugbear of mine, Nick Dacos. People think he's outside, cheap ball, whatever. It is one of the biggest myths in football. He is a contested possession midfielder who does it the way that only the very, very best do it. And I'm talking the best that I've ever seen, Gary Ablett. Very similar profile to what he does. He wins loose ball contested possessions. The loose ball is the ball that he's bobbling out in space. He reacts to it quicker than anyone else, which everyone then thinks, he's winning outside ball. No. Number 1 contested possession winner on the ground on the weekend.
As well as number 1 contested in the grand final.
In the grand final, because he does it different ways. He's an absolute superstar, and his game was, again, amazing on the weekend.
I was talking to Lee Matthews about Nick Dacos a couple of weeks ago. I did an editorial on Nick Dacos, and he said it reminded him of something Acker said to him many years ago. He said, Acker came in after one game and said, I turn hard ball gets into loose ball gets. I'm that quick.
Ablett was the best. I mean, his reaction time just was unbelievable.
You played him a bit, didn't you, Kate?
He just was able to read it before anyone. Yeah. You think, how is he getting 40 possessions every week? Well, that is why. Dane Swan was the other one who I also thought was elite in that space, where they just react to that ground ball. Get and react quicker than anyone. Who did the coaches disrespect Hoyney according to champion data?
Yeah, so we'll just do 4 today instead of 5 like we did last year. We'll do 5 next week, obviously. But we'll start with Sydney, Melbourne. I thought Tom Papley got missed in there. Didn't get a vote from the coaches.
Ooh.
We had him as the 8th best player for the round.
Gee.
So just gone. So I was actually really interested to see him
Maybe
playing a little bit more midfield time as well. He started with the first 2 centre clearances.
Very
of the
clean
game.
for the conditions.
Very. So 20 disposals, nine score involvements in a goal. Just to put it into context, if that stays the way across the course of the season.
Tom Harley's a big listener to the program.
That will put him with only 2 or 3 players that would do that across the year. 20 in
next.
1 goal. So well done there. Zach Bailey for Brisbane. So he didn't get a vote on the weekend. He was sandwiched in between Harry Mackay and Charlie Curnow as the top 3 rated players on the ground. Love what he does. The ratings value the impact that he does. Only 15 disposals, but go and have a look where he won it, all in dangerous areas, and more often than not. Sort of led to scores. 15 disposals, 8 of them led to scores. That's a great return.
Next.
Braden Fiorini, so he might be interesting to see whether or not this guy continues to flourish under the Damien Hardwick new system.
He's stalled a fair bit, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has. So didn't get a vote on the weekend. From the coaches. We had him as the 4th best player in that game on the weekend. Just gone. His ball use is his point of difference. 7th most impact with ball in hand of any midfielder.
And the final one
on the weekend,
wearing a beard for the first time.
And this guy, Lockie Ash, love him. Absolutely love him. The combination of him and Lockie Whitfield could be, could provide them with the 2 most dangerous counter-attacking halfback flankers in the game. So he was actually, the 5th highest rated player for the round. Just gone, Lockie Ash, 25 disposals, 500 metres gained. So him and Whitfield, they could be a pairing that will cause carnage for the opposition.
Yeah.
Now, Hoyney, we want to get some of these questions off the text in. So
Fire
very quickly,
away.
your gem was?
So the Gem, Heaney and Grundy, their third quarter, they combined for 11 of 13 clearances.
Fantastic. And your horror?
And then Collingwood. So Collingwood, the horror, that was, so based on expected scores, win by 15, lost by 32. That differential of 47, 6.
They actually won on expected score.
And won comfortably as well. So that's why don't panic if you're Collingwood.
All right, let's ask you some questions. Matt wants to know, in 2023, which team was the most effective at moving the ball? Oh, you've asked that one, I think, Jerry. Which was the best ball movement team on the whole? Have you answered that yet?
Yeah, so St Kilda were number 1 last year.
Right.
They probably just didn't get the scoreboard return as much as what they said. Port were high, Brisbane were high, Collingwood, Hawthorn were a few others.
Am I getting old, or did the Pies win the odd game last year without Dan McStay? You'd think he was Jeremy Cameron and Royce Hart rolled into one, according to the Pies fans he's been listening to.
Yeah, they did. He's still a loss. I mean, they wouldn't have got through to a grand final if it wasn't for him and his performance against GWS. But I think they'll be fine. I think they'll be fine, Collingwood. As I said, just don't panic with what they did on the weekend against GWS.
A little bit of love here for Jordan Boyd from Mark off the text. How did he come up for the Blues?
Yeah, no, he rated. He actually rated really well off our stuff. And I was just watching him on the weekend. As I said, I was just curious watching Carlton and their ball movement. As I said off the top, Melbourne, Carlton and the Dogs were the 3 for me this year that I've just got to keep an eye on in terms of how they move it. I think, his ball use is his point of difference. And that's what rated him so well on the weekend. So whether or not he can actually continue to go and sort of keep up that form, if he can. The fact that Zach Williams is back in the team, and it's probably going to take him a couple of weeks, realistically, to get going again. Adam Sard, we know, provides a lot of creativity. That could then elevate this game and this area of the game, which they need to take to another level if they're going to compete at the end of the year.
Jared Lyons to take Coleman's place?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. No, I wouldn't have thought. If he's playing in that team, his role is as a centre bounce, stoppage clearance player.
Please ask Hoyney, is Darcy Moore given a licence by the coach to play so loose and off his direct opponent?
I think that's just the Collingwood defensive system. I mean, Collingwood last year were involved in the fewest one-on-one contests that we've ever seen across the course of a season. They don't defend one-on-one. They leave to help out their teammate. They leave to go to the next and the most dangerous player. So I think that's just how they play. I think that's why Darcy's so effective with what he actually does. Sometimes it can get caught out, and he can have games where Collingwood supporters do get frustrated, and the industry does get frustrated. But I think you just got to cop. I think he's got to cop that time to time.
Because keepings off is such a big part of football now. Has the pressure rating gone down in the first week?
I didn't actually have a look at the pressure rating overall, G.
I mean, it would have been horrendous on an average given the performance of Carlton in the first quarter and a half and Richmond for 2
Yeah,
quarters.
the Richmond and the GWS Collingwood game was a low pressure game. So I know Sydney Melbourne was high, but the other 3 were actually pretty low. But we've only got 4 games to work off. So we're
Hoyney,
not
if you
gonna,
could only
jump to
watch
conclusions.
one of these 3 games on the weekend, you can only pick one. Would it be Collingwood Sydney, Geelong St Kilda, or Melbourne Western Bulldogs?
No, Collingwood was Sydney for me.
Ooh,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I'd
No,
take
Collingwood
the-
was. Yeah.
I think I'd
You
take,
okay?
I'd
What are
take
you
the
going?
I'd take the Cats and the Saints. I think that's a fascinating game.
I think in terms of what it means for the season, I think Geelong and St Kilda, I think that's just pivotal in terms of what actually happens there. But in terms of just the actual, watching absolute pure footy, I'm taking.
What do the
Collingwood
Bulldogs
Sydney.
need to change to play finals this year?
Ball movement, need to get their ball movement game going. As I said, bottom 4 last year. Defensively, they had that patch last year, a 2-month patch where they're actually really strong behind the footy. They just need to be able to get that back and just some consistency, I think.
Good to have
with
you
how they
back,
play.
Hoyney. Looking forward
Great to
to it
be
next
here.
week.